On March 8, 2022, the most recent edition of the National Footprint and Biocapacity accounts became available online. This celebratory launch event includes introductory remarks from the Dean of the Faculty of Environment and Urban Change at York University, a presentation by the 2022 production team, a keynote by Severin Suzuki, an overview of our future research directions, and an audience Q&A panel. This first video contains the welcome from the Dean and remarks from the production team.
Greetings, everyone. I am thrilled to welcome you all, our global audience, to the launch of the 2022 edition of the National Ecological Footprint and Biocapacity accounts. My name is Alice Havorka, and I am the Dean of the Faculty of Environmental and Urban Change at York University in Toronto, Canada. I want to begin our event today by acknowledging that York University is situated on the traditional territories of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Tkaronto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It's now home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities. This area of Tkaronto is governed by the Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. And I would like to acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Of course, we are meeting each other today from around the world. And so please take this moment, the responsibility and this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional territories upon which you are currently situated. So our Faculty of Environmental and Urban Change is York's newest faculty. And we created this faculty as a call to action to respond to some of the most pressing challenges facing people and the planet. Last week, the IPCC, or the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, released its 2022 report on the impacts, vulnerabilities, and adaptation options of a warming planet. For those who have read this report, the messages are clear if they weren't before. Everywhere around the planet is affected. There's no inhabited region escaping the dire impacts from rising temperatures and increasingly extreme weather. About half of the population, between 3.3 and 3.6 billion people, live in areas highly vulnerable to climate change. Millions of people face food and water shortages owing to climate change, even at current levels of heating. We have mass die-offs of species, from trees to corals, already underway. Some countries have agreed to conserve 30% of the Earth's land, but conserving half may be necessary to restore the ability of natural ecosystems to cope with the damage wreaked on them. So it's within this context that our mission at the Faculty of Environmental and Urban Change is to produce and mobilize knowledge for a just and sustainable future. Here at York University, we produce the National Footprint and Biocapacity accounts that detail how our economies, our cities, our daily activities are dependent on and impact the planet's ecosystems. Our Ecological Footprint Institute produces annually these accounts, and today is our 2022 data launch. And we serve as an international research hub to drive methodological advancements of these accounts. And we're also focused on preparing the next generation of leaders in sustainability informatics through our undergraduate, graduate, and professional training programs. York's Environmental and Urban Change faculty is proud to collaborate with the Footprint Data Foundation and the Global Footprint Network on this significant research effort, which reaches millions of individuals, researchers, and policymakers each year. So today we invite you to learn more about our Ecological Footprint Institute, and to that end, I'll bring to the stage the director of EFI, Eric Miller.
Great, thank you. Great to connect with all of you around the world at this very moment. So I'll start off by reflecting on the concept of an ecological footprint. An ecological footprint is the area of land and water that is needed to feed us and our pets and our animals, to generate fibers from cotton and jute and hemp, and to supply renewable materials, including wood and pulp, also to accommodate our settlements and infrastructure, and to metabolize the carbon that we emit from burning fuels. We detail ecological footprint by 6 components, which are summable without any double counting. Altogether, this is the area needed to sustain our consumption of renewable resources, settlements, and carbon emissions. Now, an ecological footprint can be compared to biocapacity, which is the area available to sustain an ecological footprint. Biocapacity is detailed in comparable components. These 2 measures can be compared to each other on a planetary basis and nationally and subnationally and on other spatial scales as well. We express both in units of a global hectare, so they can be compared and derived and compared across the planet and over time as well. So that's the concept. And you'll hear from 5 of us who spent the last 10 months harvesting about 48 million rows of data from various multinational data sources to generate the National Ecological Footprint and Biocapacity accounts. We built upon the great legacy and leadership of the Global Footprint Network to produce the accounts for 240 countries and components of the world that currently exist or have existed since 1961. And so here are some highlights. On a global basis, ecological footprint has grown tremendously. This is a measure of ecological footprint divided by biocapacity. In every year since 1971, ecological footprint has exceeded biocapacity. In 2018, ecological footprint was 75% greater than biocapacity, meaning that it would take the planet about 21 months of biological production to provide what was needed for 12 months. Clearly, this is unsustainable. Now let's think ahead to the year 2050. Countries around the world have committed to reaching a net zero emissions target by 2050. Essentially, this means that by 2050, the world has essentially committed to reaching a goal of having an ecological footprint to within the level of biocapacity in that year. And in that year 2050, that means that every unit of carbon emitted by humanity would need to be drawn down in the same year. The genius of the ecological footprint accounts is that we integrate the demand for carbon sequestration with other demands on the planet's lands and waters at the same time. After all, in 2050, we'll also need lands and waters to provide us with food and fibers and renewable materials to accommodate our settlements and infrastructure and so on. And that's the genius of the ecological footprint accounting system, is it integrates these together. It was about 20 years ago that the concept of ecological footprint was first published in an academic journal. It was clearly ahead of its time. And so as we think about different pathways to get from here to there, clearly the world needs to measure and manage the transition using accounts such as the ecological footprint and biocapacity accounts. So please use this data that we produced to learn from the past, to understand the present, and to explore future scenarios. The data that we produce is available on a global basis and also on a national basis as well. And with additional work, it's possible to generate data at a local level and institutionally as well, as we have done and as the Global Footprint Network continues to do. So we produce data for all countries from 1961. And here's just one example with results from Ukraine in 2018. And so we detail biocapacity in hectares and also in global hectares for each country. Global hectares are national hectares that are weighted to the average global productivity of each component of footprint. And so that way we can make comparisons between biocapacity across the planet and over time in comparable units. We calculate ecological footprint for all the production that takes place within each country. And so with this example for Ukraine, and that's the production that takes place within the country within that year. We also calculate the ecological footprint embodied within all the imports to each country in each year. We also include the calculation of the ecological footprint embodied within the exports from every country to the rest of the world in that year. And then by adding imports to production and subtracting exports, we can arrive at the ecological footprint of consumption. And so in this case, then, This example shows you how, in the case for Ukraine in 2018, Ukraine's footprint of consumption was less than its footprint of production related to its trade relationships with the rest of the world. Now, this is available for every country in every year and for the world. And within this data are even more interesting details when you get down to the components, even within each of these, with each of these components of the accounts. And so, well, with that, let's hear from my colleagues who have prepared some interesting examples of how the data can be used to better understand the ecological significance of humanity's economic activities. So let's hear from Kendra, who produced the aquatic components of footprint and biocapacity in the accounts, to share with her some additional findings.
Hello, can everyone hear me okay? Awesome, thank you. So in a random conversation amongst some of my friends, the sentence, "Didn't you know that eating shrimp can be terrible for the environment?" came up. And in all honesty, no, at the time, I did not know that. The conversation actually timed perfectly with the beginning of a class in which I created the data story to krill is to kill, answering the question, is eating shellfish selfish? A mouthful, yes. I used the data produced through the ecological footprint and biocapacity accounts to understand trends in shrimp production, both through fishing and aquaculture, to understand its impacts on the environment and whether high-yielding countries should or could be regulated in order to uphold global sustainability agreements. And while I can't answer the personal moral question for all of you on whether eating shellfish is selfish, I can definitely demonstrate through the data that the accounts produce that in at least 2 of the top shrimp-producing countries, which I believe is on the screen before you, aquaculture is the primary method of shrimp harvesting. This data was then combined with countless published studies that discuss the impacts of aquaculture on coastal environments to then address a potential connection between consumption demand, whether import or export based, and the coastal degradation as a result of shrimp aquaculture. The data then allowed me to provide greater context to academic literature and then also establish further research questions regarding ethical regulation within the industry. So as a budding analyst and researcher, the data really was an incredible source to begin researching many of the academic queries that I had. So now we can move and let's hear from Apeksha, who produced the carbon component of the footprint and biocapacity accounts.
Thanks, Kendra. Hello, guys. You will find that my data story is very relatable to our everyday lives. We all must have shopped online at least once, because of convenience, speed, and doorstep deliveries. But have you ever wondered what could be the environmental impact and the carbon footprint of such deliveries? During the pandemic, 82% of Canadians shopped online, whether it was for food or groceries or clothes or for any other household stuff. To cater to this ever-increasing demand, delivery companies use rail, road, and air transport modes to fulfill these orders on time. That has led to an increase in carbon and greenhouse gas emissions. With this, there has also been a rise in the product packaging materials such as carton boards, folding box boards, packaging papers, and other wrapping papers. So, using the intensive data of the footprint accounts, I wanted to investigate the trend of carbon emissions from transportation in Canada and analyze the increasing production as well as the consumption trend of the packaging materials. The graph on the left indicates that over the years, transportation sector has generated more emissions than any other major sector in Canada, out of which shockingly, road transport emissions constitute about 80% of the emissions, followed by domestic aviation. Also, 44% of these road transport emissions are from the freight transport, or in other words, commodity transportation. This trend is getting attention and people have started calling this as urban freight, which is believed to be the next frontier for climate action in Canada. For more details on this data, please have a look at the video presentation on our YouTube channel. And next, we'll hear from Ahmed, who produced the area and trade components of the footprint accounts.
Thank you, Apeksha. I was indeed responsible for the land and trade part of the accounts, and that was an amazing experience where we got our hands dirty with the querying language SQL. We had to problem solve, think creatively and out of the box. I remember I ran into some problems with the code. I had to work out how to extract data from a data source for land that had been completely renewed and updated that year, and then overcoming obstacles in quality control, having to look for clues and hints within large passages of code. It was an amazing experience. But today, what I'll focus on is my data story, which is based around the world's transport emissions, as recorded by IEA and visualized by myself here in these charts. Now, a little background. I am an aspiring transport and land use planner who cares about the environment and sustainability. And that's why I was interested in emissions from the transport sector, specifically who's emitting the most and why. I discovered from my exploration that not only is the USA responsible for more than a fifth of the world's transport-related emissions, but it is also among the top per capita emitters, with Canada right alongside it. In fact, only Luxembourg, a small European country with a population of 630,000, exceeds it in transport emissions. Canada was also among the highest total emitters in transport, and the average American and Canadian was responsible for about 5 tons of carbon dioxide released into the environment, in contrast to the global average of about 1 ton. In terms of trends, while the global average has only slightly increased since the 60s and has hovered at 1 ton of carbon dioxide for transport emissions, the US and Canada both have been way above the global average and have experienced a rapid increase, a constant high, and only a small decrease until reaching the 5-ton mark around the year 2008. About 75% of transport emissions come from road-related emissions, according to IEA, which includes emissions from cars. And what I see from these trends is the significant impact that car-focused lifestyles and infrastructure, something the US and Canada are infamous for, has on the environment. The 20th century hailed the car as the savior to our transportation needs, and with the car came the suburb. So perhaps if you really care about the environment and our footprint on this world, we need to rethink our ideas about how we design our infrastructure and our houses and the inefficiencies of auto-centric living spaces. Thank you. Flora will now take the stage.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. So I work on the crop and livestock components, gathering and processing large databases from FAO. But when we were asked to produce a data story, I was actually in Argentina, my country of origin. And at the time, a heated debate on a bilateral trade agreement between Argentina and China was underway. The agreement entailed installing initially 20 to 25 industrial pig farming units in Argentina to raise pigs exclusively for pig meat export to China. So the agreement was now open to public opinion, and several environmentalists and social activists expressed their concerns about it. So I decided to use the national accounts to explore the land requirements of this agreement. I used the latest year of available data to figure out the global hectares required for Argentina's current pig production, including crops needed for feed, specifically maize, since this is the main grain that pigs feed on. In the year 2018, Argentina raised a total of 5,191,450 pigs. These pigs require a total of 4,561,727 tons of maize, and the total crop ecological footprint of feeding these pigs was approximately 300,000 global hectares. So I use these numbers to estimate what the impact would have been had the agreement been fully implemented by the end of this year. And to help better visualize the concept of global hectares, I converted the results into the quantity of bomboneras, the famous Argentinian football stadium. So feeding only these extra pigs would require the equivalent of 131,093 bombonera stadiums. So for more details, you can read the full story on our website or check it on our YouTube channel. Please, we invite you and encourage you to use our data. You can get it in several ways. On one way, you can go to data.footprintnetwork.org or an interactive data explorer with graphs and charts that include the integration of footprint data with the Human Development Index. Or you could go to footprint.info.yourq.ca to connect with us for data downloads. You can also there find video presentation of our data stories.